Welcome to Talking Feds, a roundtable that brings together prominent former federal officials and special guests for a dynamic discussion of the most important political and legal topics of the day. I'm Harry Littman. The first presidential debate was, for Democrats, 90 minutes of torture. President Biden started off weakly with a notably raspy voice and seemed badly off his game, with many moments of unclear and even doddering answers. Trump, for his part, served up lie after outlandish, vicious lie, but they almost seemed beside the point next to Biden's shaky performance. The gravity of the debate was impossible for the Biden camp to spin away. The president's performance provoked unanimous criticism by analysts and immediate gnashing of teeth within the party and the donor base. A chorus of calls arose for Biden to immediately withdraw from the race. It is a crisis of the first order within the White House, and all see the next several days as existential, either calming the waters somewhat or roiling them to a point where the pressure on him to step aside becomes overwhelming. Almost, but not quite, lost in the debate debacle was the Supreme Court, which this week issued a series of decisions that by and large advanced the court's strongly conservative agenda, and in particular, one that completely upended administrative law. Now the country holds its collective breath for the imminent ruling on immunity, set to drop shortly after this episode is published. Regardless of the outcome, the prospects of Trump's facing trial for the pivotal January 6 charges already seem very remote. To sift through the damage of what was universally viewed as a terrible evening for President Biden and a very consequential week for the Supreme Court, and to analyze what those events portend for an election that is about 4 months away, we're extremely fortunate to welcome three of the country's most highly regarded political analysts. And they are Andrea Mitchell, NBC News' chief Washington correspondent and chief foreign affairs correspondent and the host of the great MSNBC's Andrea Mitchell Reports. A veteran political correspondent for NBC News, Andrea has covered every presidential campaign since 1980 for the network, as well as reporting on intelligence and national security issues across all NBC News and MSNBC properties. Thank you so much, Andrea Mitchell, for being with us, especially on such a dramatic week.
Thanks, Harry.
Charlie Sykes, a founder and former editor-at-large of The Bulwark, an MSNBC contributor, and the author of 9 books, most recently, How the Right Lost Its Mind. His Substack newsletter is called To the Contrary. Welcome, as always, Charlie Sykes.
Thank you.
And Jacob Weisberg, executive chair and co-founder of Pushkin Industries and previously CEO of the Slate Group, co-founder of Panoply and editor-in-chief of Slate Magazine. He, too, is the author of several books and serves as vice chair of the Committee to Protect Journalists. Thanks so much for being here, Jacob.
Thanks, Harry.
All right, so we're a night out from a debate that provoked a collective heart attack among Democratic insiders. Let's just start here. How bad was it?
Boy, I'll go, Harry, if you want. I mean, I think to call it a train wreck is kind of unfair to train wrecks. You know, train wrecks usually have survivors, and I don't think Biden is going to survive that performance. You know, he couldn't say sentences that were coherent, and saying sentences that make sense is just an essential and basic part of the president's job. And you project that forward 4 years. I mean, you project it forward 1 year. It's sad because Biden has had a life of service. I think he's been a very effective and successful president. I think he's a very decent human being. I think he's someone who deserves our respect. And honestly, it's hard to see him like that. It's like seeing a grandparent or an elderly relative who's aging and fading away. And there's just such a strong and clear consensus from so many people who support him and even people who love him that it's time for him to move on for the good of the party, the good of the country. I've rarely seen, in fact, I don't think I've ever seen a consensus like that coming out of a presidential debate.
I've covered presidential debates since the 70s. I think Ford Carter was the first that I covered in Philadelphia as a local reporter, admittedly, and then went national a couple of years later. And it was just incoherent. And the fact that Joe Biden has never been a good speaker and discounting that he's overcome a stutter, and that is part of the equation here. He's not the Joe Biden he was just a couple of years ago. And people on the Hill were telling me, well, if we expected that he would overcome all of the age issue problems because he'd be well prepared, and we saw him at the State of the Union. That's what the House members and the senators were expecting, the Democrats. And what they saw instead was, as Jacob said, a train wreck. And the fact that he didn't go on the attack, that he missed opportunity after opportunity, that he shot himself in the foot or the head, whatever you want to call it, by in the middle of an abortion response, inserting a reference to a Trump talking point about the undocumented immigrant who was involved in an alleged murder, which perhaps wouldn't have come up except Trump kept hitting on immigration. So, it was a missed opportunity, number one. Number two, it was seen around the world, which is really damaging, and at home politically. Number three, it took all the attention away, overshadowing Trump's continual lying, not responding to the questions, and bringing up immigration over and over again, and saying so many untruths with nobody challenging him. It was up to Biden to challenge him, because clearly the moderators had made a decision that that was not their format and they weren't going to, whereas previous formats have permitted that and have encouraged it. So it was just inexplicable to me. Just one or two quick things about preparation. He should never have been prepared with all of those statistics. Not only did he forget them and it put him into a clutch, but then he would say 25, no, it's 35. So he was repeating, even about his own golf handicap. And that was perhaps the worst moment for both of them. It was a 6, no, it was an 8. And then that nobody told him he was going to be on camera the whole time. I was with a group of Democrats, and including one elected member, and they were shouting at the television, "Close your mouth, Joe," because his mouth was agape. So he didn't realize he was in a split screen, which under the Presidential Debate Commission would have not been one of the rules. But because they went outside the debate commission, they agreed to it, or didn't prepare him for the fact that he was always going to be on camera, which was also an opportunity. He could have looked incredulous or laughed or conveyed things visually when Trump was lying, but he didn't seem to be even aware that he had that potential.
Can I quickly stay with you for a second? Because I know your phone's been ringing off the hook with people you know on Capitol Hill, and you probably know more people than anyone does on Capitol Hill. Are you hearing from people, as you sometimes do with Trump, actually, this is the Biden that we've sometimes been seeing when we're one-on-one with him? We hoped it wouldn't come out. Or are you hearing this was inexplicable, this came out of nowhere, and it was just a terrible off night?
There have certainly been reports. I have not specifically heard that from the Hill, but my phone has been ringing since last night. I was up most of the night taking calls, and I covered the Hill for NBC. And it was just wild. I've never heard a reaction like that. And we have surmised, because the staff is so protective of him, that we don't have opportunities. He doesn't do deep interviews. He doesn't do news conferences, that this is the case. And I've noticed that when he's meeting with foreign leaders, including G7 allies, he uses note cards. I covered Ronald Reagan for 8 years. And he uses note cards in the Oval Office to say 3 sentences, welcoming a foreign leader. And that is not the Joe Biden that I covered as the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
I agree with everything that's been said. It was not only bad, it was shockingly bad. And this goes to your question and to what Andrea just mentioned. You can't just write this off as one bad night or a bump in the road, because what this did was it exposed something that we have been whispering about, that people have been warning about for some time. And it raised all kinds of questions about not just his capacity to take on Donald Trump, but his capacity to serve as president for another 4 years. And those are all out there, and that is not going to go away. To Jacob's point, 40-some million people watched that in real time. And I said to my wife, I think it was about 10 minutes in, this thing is over. It's done. And I don't know how you can walk that past. I think that he was clearly over-prepared and underpowered. what I want to keep coming back to how shocking it was for a lot of people, because I think that what was exposed was the fact that a lot of the Democrats and the White House had created a bubble around this particular issue. We had the warnings. You go back, David Ignatius, Ezra Klein, Mark Leibovich, one after another, had sort of put out the smoke signals. Hey guys, this is not a good idea. Perhaps he ought to leave. I think that these were the conversations that were taking place in private, people who spent time with him or saw the kinds of things that Andrea was mentioning about the note cards. And they were trying in a diplomatic way to warn the rest of us, to warn Democrats that it was not a good idea to bet American democracy on this one 80-plus-year-old man. And yet those warnings were shuffled off. I think there was a certain amount of denial. And I think that part of what's going on right now is kind of the credibility question. Was the White House and the staff engaging in some gaslighting when they said he was sharp as a tack? I wrote a piece within the last week or so about the cheap fakes, the fake videos that made him look more infirm than he was. Now you go, okay, we just saw 90 minutes of all of that. So this is a crisis. I mean, to say that this has induced panic is not overstating it. I have never, ever seen a reaction like this, both public and in private. I've never seen the kind of consensus that we're seeing right now. And I do wonder over the next 72 hours what the White House is going to do. Are they going to circle the wagons? Are they going to double down on this? Are they going to say there is no plan B? Or is there going to be an intervention? Because I had the same reaction that Jacob had. It was painful. It was embarrassing. It was very uncomfortable to watch Joe Biden. And you wonder whether the people who really care about him really want to subject him to this, because he deserves an honorable exit and an honorable retirement. But running for another term is not a gold watch for past service. And I think the Democrats also need to take this deep breath. If they really do think that Donald Trump represents an existential threat to American democracy, they need to act like it and not put Joe Biden's feelings ahead of what we all saw last night. Was what we saw last night. I mean, on Thursday night, was someone who is not going to beat Donald Trump. And I have to say that I had the same experience that Andrea had, that my phone is lighting up, and whatever people are saying in public, it's even worse in private, the reaction to all of this. It's not going to be fixable.
I just wanted to pick up on Charlie's point about the wishful thinking. I mean, it's maybe not a major point, but, on the show a few weeks ago, I was here, and I won't name names of the others who were, but I think all of us were predicting that Biden would rally and that Trump seemed pretty diminished too. And I just want to acknowledge that as a collective error and kind of whistling past the graveyard a bit on the part of the pundit class. Yes, there are honorable exceptions. I think, Ezra Klein, if you listen to his podcast, has been in a lot of ways the most out there, strong and early, just saying Biden needs to be replaced. And I agreed with that, but I think in self-examination and all honesty, I was part of the wishful thinking that, sure, he's a little older, but he's basically the same person. In the debate, he'd do fine. This just showed you not to take things like that on faith. I mean, again, I wrote down a few quotes from the debate that just kind of jumped out, but that are kind of their self-writing Saturday Night Live sketch. Americans are getting raped by their brothers and sisters. We beat Medicare. I mean, he was saying these things. Some of the things he said wrong, you knew what he meant or knew what he was trying to say. And then other things were really just dada. They were kind of gaga gibberish, and it wasn't one slip. It was through the whole thing. And that's why I think it was so decisive.
I was thinking last night, okay, they've got to show this to him. They've got to sit him down and show it to him and see how he reacts to it, to make him understand if the leaders of the House and Senate were to come to him like Hugh Scott and Barry Goldwater and say, your time is up for the good of the party, because Trump is, they believe, an existential threat. But these are the same people who have been with him for 30 years and the same family that encouraged him to run, and they know better than anyone else if he's diminished. And I'm in my 70s. You've got to ask yourself, am I the person I was 5 years ago? Can I still do this? My answer now is yes, but could I do it 5 years from now? I don't think so. And he has to ask himself, if he's diminished this much since we saw him just a few years ago, what is he going to be like in another 4 years? And is it a responsible choice?
And that really goes to the heart of it. And people are going to be asking those questions. And I talked to voters who completely loathe Donald Trump today, and they are just alarmed at the prospect of a Biden presidency. And so this is the thing. And again, I actually don't think it's a trivial point about the pundits engaging in wishful thinking, because I sense a great deal of disillusionment and kind of this, we need to reevaluate what we have been thinking about this campaign as a result of that. And I think there's certainly a crisis of wishful thinking that was exposed.
We are always told when there are bad polls or whatever, but yes, keep in mind that it's only this very narrow stratum of swing voters, but it may be those voters for whom just the vivid contrast impacts the most. On Andrea's point about the split screen, which I guess CNN just decided at the last moment, I remember Biden historically sort of mugging a little for the camera as a debate opponent when he would confront incredulous points. But, remembering that made it seem even worse, because even his sort of look of incredulity, as you put it, the mouth agape, etc., seemed somehow kind of weak, and the incredulity of a sort of old man who can't really do anything about it. And then finally, I just want to say, we've talked only about substance so far, and of course, debates. I also was very crestfallen and panicky by 30 seconds in, because so much, the voice and how that happened, the raspiness, which really just screamed out old granddad. And it's the only time you see him, and I'm sure that you will see them. Trump won't debate again, side to side. And that sort of vivid thing, I remember people say a lot that when Kennedy debated Nixon, people who were just listening on radio thought that maybe Nixon had won. It was the terrible image. Here, I think a transcript wouldn't have been so bad. Not great, but not so bad. But it doesn't matter. It isn't a transcript. It's people, especially the swing voters, I think, make really sort of snap judgment. Here's a person of vitality, lying all the time, but they don't know it. Here's a person who's really, fading. I just want to follow up what a couple of you have said. Yes, there's family who, obviously is most solicitous, but he's got this circle. They were the debate prep team, so they're under a lot of pressure now. But, they're really old hands, Donlin and Klain and those guys. Do you think that they, have what it takes to give it to him straight, and that they will now? Do you think he's going to get really sort of straightforward advice from the people that he most trusts? Or, you've been in sort of similar positions. Does everyone try to soft pedal it?
This team will soft pedal it, I think. But I think Friday night he's going to see, or he's seeing the donors, and he will get straight talk, I think, from the money people. They have nothing to lose except more of their money. And I think those sessions might, I don't know if people will be polite, goes to the Hamptons or whatever he's doing. I think the problem may be that he's got these great people, but they've been with him for 35 years. He's Joe, and they are staff people. It'd be very hard for any one of them, including some cabinet secretaries, to say to him, your time is up. I think if he heard it from Jill or his sister Valerie, that would be different. But they clearly encouraged him to run. Jill Biden, Dr. B, was out last week in California attacking the age issue and saying, look at me, I'm proud of my wrinkles. Age is wisdom. She was taking it head on in a number of speeches. So I don't know this, but if there's bad polls and the money drops, then maybe the inner circle would come to him and say, maybe your legacy is so important that it's time to do it. And especially if they hear from the leaders of the House and Senate.
I have a question there. I think that we've sort of set the stage for the next 72 hours with the incredible consensus of the opinion class, which, again, I can't remember when it was so widespread. And the question is whether or not he's going to be seeing all of that. But clearly it gives people permission to say, yeah, you need to move on. So I agree with you that the staffers are not likely to do this because, of course, their power depends on his. But are there people who have the stature to do? And you mentioned Hugh Scott and Barry Goldwater going to see Richard Nixon, that great moment where the senior folks in the Republican Party went to Richard Nixon and said, you don't have the support, you have to go. Is there an equivalent group? And obviously I'm thinking of if it was Barack Obama, if it was other people of that stature. You're shaking your head.
There's a lot of resent in Biden world against Barack Obama for passing over him for Hillary Clinton. So I don't think either the Clintons or the Obamas, it could have an impact. It might have the reverse effect. I think Pelosi, Schumer, and some of those people, and Ted Kaufman, his closest friend and former senator, those people could tell him.
Before leaving the actual performance, can I just serve up one? The point you made, Charlie, this isn't going away. Does it, in fact, fix in Amber the image of a president not up to the job, and it'll feel this way in 2 weeks and 3.5 months? And then second, anything to say about Trump, who really, more than I even understood as I was listening in real time when I looked at it after, every single answer was a brazen lie. But I think the operating assumption is nobody cares. So just any final thoughts about the debate before we move to what's next?
Well, I really experienced Trump as a bystander to the debate. He lies as he breathes. And I take the criticism of the CNN moderators for not fact-checking him in real time. However, it's not their job to debate him. It's Biden's job to debate him. And if they, in the absence of Biden turning in any kind of plausible performance, if they had challenged Trump, I think it would have been unfair, might be too strong, but it wouldn't have been an appropriate way for them to handle Biden's failure. I think Trump is an effective performer, and I think what was most effective about his performance was him toning it down. I think, we're used to him being much nastier, much more aggressive, much more, prowling alpha male in a debate. And this one, I think he quickly sensed with his very good television instincts that his opponent was, as in the famous Napoleonic quote, in the act of committing suicide, and he shouldn't interfere.
Maybe his best moment was, I think, the ad-lib. I don't know what he just said, and I don't think he knows either. Man, that was killer. Charlie, you had a thought?
No, I agree. In fact, Jacob's description of Donald Trump as being kind of a bystander, it's very interesting. Somebody actually tried to commission a column, said, wanted me to write about Donald Trump's lying and everything, which is, of course, not a news story, and of course, deserves to be discussed and written about. My response was, that's not the focus of last night. I'm sorry, the 100,000th piece about how he's lying. He was just standing there while Joe Biden was immolating. What I thought was striking, though, was that he was able to sort of jump in and exploit when Joe Biden would lose his train of thought on Medicare. He would do that. And so I would love to be able to give everybody a lecture about how, don't, which I have done in the past, by the way, don't be distracted by the show, by the performance. We should be focusing on the substance. We should be focusing on the stakes. But the reality is that the show completely eclipsed any substance. There were moments when I think Joe Biden probably was making really, really good sense, making really good, well-documented points, and nobody was listening. Nobody was paying any attention because you're looking at him going, what the fuck am I looking at? What am I seeing here?
That's what a debate is.
He's mumbling, and that's the reality. I also agree. It was very frustrating to watch Donald Trump lie and not be fact-checked by the moderators. But I also agree that was Joe Biden's job. I now have mixed feelings about it because I agreed with David Frum in advance that they should never have given Donald Trump this format. This debate should never have taken place because it normalizes, a convicted felon, a man who is so mendacious that he's going to fill the airways with lies. On the other hand, as we wake up the next day, this was necessary because it's a clarifying moment. And now the question is, what did the Democrats do with that? And I assume you're going to get into this. I have been one of those where I've been very concerned about Joe Biden all along, but I've also been convinced that we're kind of stuck with it. These are the cards we're dealt because the Democrats have no plausible plan B. I don't know that they have a plan B. In fact, I'm sure they don't have a plan B. But now, what is that old Sherlock Holmes saying? When you eliminate everything that is impossible, whatever is left, no matter how improbable, is the solution. Well, okay. So now we're going to have to go to things that are deeply improbable. What would the Democrats look like if they moved on from Joe Biden? And nobody knows the answer to that.
And that's the perfect segue. So I just want to say first, allowing, as everyone said, 72 hours even when we're published, it might feel and look very different. It's because it's got so much to do with how much the sort of conflagration spreads. Tonight as we tape, as Andrew points out, he meets with donors, etc. Of course, the circling of wagons would be happening. So allowing that, something we don't know as we sit here, which is how much this panic is going to either spread or abate in the next few hours. I serve up the points that Charlie made, but also, how the hell would it even work? What would happen? For starters, there are 10 people out there who, when their time comes, they want to, are they all stepping aside? What happens to Kamala Harris? Is it a genuine brokered convention, which we haven't seen since 1952? Could the party emerge with unanimity? I serve up to you, wise persons, those kinds of thoughts as well.
I just want to make one caveat, which is that the Raleigh speech was very strong. And so a number of people are saying, well, where was that guy? And of course, the difference is the teleprompter. But he had the teleprompter. That said, there is a process. It would mean he would have to withdraw. He has the delegates. He has a majority of the delegates. She has none, Kamala Harris. So all the delegates are in his pocket, and there's a process under DNC rules. They change every, 4 years. I don't know the latest, but they would have to have an open convention unless there was some group of wise men and women who would select someone, and that would never happen. First of all, in the Democratic Party, it would never happen with Kamala raising her hand. So to really open it, you've got to open it, and everybody takes their shot. And you would have a number of governors and Kamala and several rounds of balloting. And it would be in Chicago with protesters against the war outside. And welcome to 1968.
Here's what, I think should happen, and I think can happen. Biden withdraws. He frees his delegates who are bound to him on the first ballot under the party rules. The primaries are all done, obviously, but candidates can declare that they're running at the convention. You know who did that? Ronald Reagan in 1968. It was a little bit of history he erased from the record, but at the last moment he thought, well, maybe if they turn against Nixon, they'll nominate me. He never ran in any of the primaries. And the candidates who want to run declare. Now, depending on how soon Biden might withdraw, that could happen next week, or it could happen very close to the convention itself. But what they would then do is campaign with the state delegations, and the state powers then become very important. The governors, the party leaders, and that's, we have all the language from the way conventions used to work around brokered conventions and smoke-filled rooms. But what happens is the delegates vote, and if there's no majority on the first ballot, they have a second ballot, and if there's no majority on the second ballot, they keep going until one of these people gets the nomination. And I think, we may look back on all of this. I mean, I'm the eternal optimist, but it's a blessing in disguise, because I think the Democrats could both end up with a much more electable candidate, but this kind of drama would so thoroughly change the dynamic around the race. And there's the dynamic and excitement about a new face, whether it's, Richard Whitmer or Gavin Newsom or Josh Shapiro or Kamala Harris. I mean, I think the Democrats have a pretty strong and appealing bench. And I think they also, if they're smart, will figure out how to campaign in this brief window in a positive way to say this is about choosing the most electable candidate and not kind of go negative against each other in a public way.
I mean, it comes to mind the drama of 1980, Reagan versus Ford, the possibility of a shared presidency. I mean, anything is possible once you open up a convention. And party rules would require successive ballots until someone has a majority. I think the fact of Kamala Harris and that she is still, despite her service and her effectiveness on the abortion issue, considered wildly unpopular among broad sectors of the Democratic Party, and that to not have her on the ticket would alienate key parts of the base. Jim Clyburn's already on the record saying that he's supporting Joe Biden. There are no defections from those longtime supporters of Biden. And so this is a long shot. You've got the speaker and Republicans creating havoc, or trying to, from the Republican side, by suggesting that this is a moment for the 25th Amendment. which was de facto done by the National Security Cabinet in the Trump White House after January 6th, where they agreed amongst themselves that nobody would let him push the button or do anything major without them all calling and agreeing. So they didn't take it to the cabinet. They wouldn't have had a majority of the cabinet. But even Pompeo, as well as the defense secretary, the Joint Chiefs chair, a number of the deputies, and I believe Robert O'Brien, the national security advisor, were all in agreement that they were going to watch him on anything military or national security. So there's that. I mean, the irony is Joe Biden has pulled together NATO, restored everything that he could, not the Paris Accords, not the Iran nuclear deal, because he didn't have Congress, but restored so many of the big mistakes that Trump made when he took office. And on the books, he's got a great resume and great legislation by Democratic standards. Yet politics is also appearance, it's speech making. He's never been a good speech maker. He always has been long-winded. He has a lot of verbal tics. And he was forgiven because he was considered to be a good man, and he was the only person who managed to get anointed by Clyburn in South Carolina primary. He had lost Iowa and New Hampshire. So he has not been a vote getter in a traditional way in the primaries, and was almost an accidental nominee when other people dropped out. I can't predict this one. Raleigh, people are saying, really helped on Friday afternoon, but when they go home on recess, which they now are, come back after July 4th, what are they going to be hearing back home?
It's not going to be pretty. Again, Joe Biden can claim that he had a successful one-term presidency if he wants to do it. So I don't know what they're going to decide. I'm very skeptical about Kamala Harris's electability in the general election, but also I have a hard time envisioning the Democratic Party passing over a black woman, in a brokered convention type thing without there being significant backlash. There's going to be a lot of problems with that. But let me give you the more optimistic take, because I know that Harry was thinking that I was the glumest person who reacted to all this.
Well, you were a spectacular tweeter last night, I got to say.
I thought I gave the optimistic take.
I did have this flash of trying to remember, of trying to think what would it look like in an open convention. I mean, the drama of that would be absolutely unparalleled in our lifetime. I found myself, thinking about Oscar W. Underwood quite a bit. And I know that Jacob probably remembers the reference to the 1924 Democratic Convention, where they went 104 ballots. Each one began, Alabama cast 24 votes for Oscar W. Underwood. 124 ballots didn't help the Democrats win in 1924. I ought to mention that. But can you imagine the excitement around a fresh face? Someone like all the names that have been mentioned. Gavin Newsom has been clearly running a shadow campaign. I mean, he is going to be ready from, the second Joe Biden makes an announcement, if he does. Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro. In a situation like that, first of all, it becomes the most exciting political event of the year. And then somebody comes out of it, and they're not Joe Biden. It'll be the choice between, Donald Trump and this fresh, younger face. It changes everything in terms of the dynamics. Now, of course, we always ought to be careful what we wish for. Sometimes governors have a very, very hard time scaling up to national campaigns. I think we've seen that a lot. Just ask Scott Walker or Ron DeSantis. But this is going to be a compressed timetable coming out in August that they did that. So from a positive point of view, and I know it seems weird given what a disaster last Thursday was, but this could be one of the best things that the Democrats could go through to deal with the disillusionment of its base, the lack of voter engagement out there, to actually have somebody who people don't feel sort of sick to their stomach that they have to choose from. I mean, this country is just deeply unhappy with the choice of 78-year-old Donald Trump versus 81-year-old Joe Biden. You bring in a young, fresh face, and it could really electrify this campaign. So there is an upside. And right now, I see only downsides sticking with Joe Biden.
All right. Well, in response to those Panglossian views, let me just say, I've looked a little bit at brokered conventions. Well, actually, it was so long ago, but 1860, Seward was in the position that maybe Kamala Harris would be. And it's fairly obscure. There's a great picture in 1860 of all the candidates, and down here on the right is this Abraham Lincoln guy. And he emerges. But as you just say, there would be such blood on the floor, right? What we would have just fought in very public fashion and spurred on by the Republicans in the House, Trump himself, these battles. And just imagine it's not Kamala Harris who emerges. So that fresh face would already have been kind of, roughed up a fair bit. I don't have a view on whether this would work or not, but when I think about it, it is kind of consistent with what you're saying, Charlie. Mind-blowing. Just such, whoa, are you kidding me? What a crazy, and so maybe it's just so crazy, it just might work. But man, the cataclysmic feature of it, especially in a modern day and age with social media, and we're talking about when, right? Just a couple months before the election itself, right? Would the Democrats then unite around whoever emerged from this process?
Mid-August. It's a late convention.
Man, this is going to play out for several weeks. I would talk about this for 10 hours more, but a couple other things happened this week that I would like to at least touch on, both legally a little, but also politically. So this week's featured major and much awaited opinions concerning abortion, free speech, criminal law, and especially the administrative state. And the day that this episode is published, we'll get the immunity opinion. That's basically a certainty now because Roberts has said Monday is the last day. But let's just start with what does really strike me as a hugely consequential decision that will have an impact on so many aspects of so many people's lives, namely the overruling of Chevron. I know we've waited 45 minutes and no one said I'm not a lawyer, and I know you're not saying, but you focus on this, I think, on Chevron a fair bit justifiably. Let me turn to you first for your thoughts.
Yes, stipulating that I'm not a lawyer. Ding, ding, ding. Right?
Ding, 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 ding. Right.
Talking to a lawyer about this. But, I do see this more in political terms. And to me, this is a big move in the quiet struggle that's always taking place around the separation of powers. And, the Chevron doctrine, which is, I understand it, and it's been in place for 40 years, since the 80s, says that when Congress passes a law that isn't clear on some point, the regulatory agency gets to interpret what it means, not the courts. And what this decision says, and there was also the Jareski decision this week, which was sort of a move in the same direction of the courts taking authority away from a regulatory agency, in that case, the SEC. The court is taking back that authority from the executive branch administrative agencies, and it's limiting the power of the administrative state. I don't know that this is inherently good or bad. What's good about it potentially is that it makes Congress, which is the more accountable power, more responsible. We can't vote out bureaucrats at the EPA. We can vote out our members of Congress if we don't like the decisions they make. And this says, be more precise in the drafting of laws. And if you're not, the courts will interpret them. What's worrying, I think, is that this sort of larger reality that the modern world is so big and so complicated, it requires technocratic expertise in all these areas to apply and interpret laws. And the regulatory agencies have that expertise and are generally, whether you like the decisions they make or not, are the most capable of doing that, more so than the courts, and certainly more than the staffers on congressional committees as they're now constituted. And, this imperils a lot of regulation that was in effect standing law, and sort of opens the door for industry and for lobbyists to relitigate all these things that have been kind of settled business. So, I think there's reason to be concerned about it. I don't think this power inherently belongs in the regulatory agencies, but because it's lived there for so long, it seems to me a little bit of a kind of judicial coup to be trying to seize it back in this case.
Okay, I am also not a lawyer, but I'm not as troubled by this as some of the other critics because, first of all, you go back to the history of the Chevron rule, back in the 1980s, conservatives liked the Chevron doctrine because back then, during the Reagan years, what was happening was the D.C. Circuit Court was basically substituting their views for what the administration wanted to do. And so this was kind of a way around liberal judges at the time. So it's kind of weird how alliances have changed. But this has been a longstanding concern, I think, among conservative students of government, that there had been a devolution of too much power to the unelected administrative state at the expense both of Congress and of the judiciary. And so I think the supporters of this ruling would say this corrects the balance. We had created a situation where Congress just didn't do its job, simply punted many of these difficult decisions to the administrative agencies. And then the administrative agencies were able to, not be subject to an aggressive overview by the federal courts. And so I think what the court has done here is it's restored the jurisdiction that the federal courts ought to have over these kinds of issues. And perhaps it's a challenge to Congress to not be quite so ambiguous. I understand that it's going to be disruptive in terms of the status quo, but this is one of those where this didn't just drop out of the heavens. This is something that legal scholars have been writing about and arguing about for many, many years. And I agree with Jacob. It's not a black or white, good or bad issue, but it is also an indication of how aggressive this court is in being willing to overturn longstanding precedents. I was talking to a lawyer about this afternoon about overturning Chevron, and his reaction was, I'm not surprised that they wanted to do this. I'm surprised that they were actually willing to pull the trigger on it, because this is a very, very, very big deal. But I suppose after Dobbs, after affirmative action, after some of these other decisions, they're basically going, hey, you know what? If not now, then when? Let's just do it all. Let's just get it all.
And I'll say within the legal academy, it's hard for people to understand, but not because it doesn't concern their lives. But in the legal academy, it's seismic. It's what? Chevron was overruled. I'll take a slightly more negative view. It just, Kagan, who knows administrative law better than anyone on the court, points out the practical impact. And I see your points about the unelected bureaucrats, and I also think it's true that it does make Congress a little lazy. Well, I don't know. We'll just put it to the agencies. They'll figure it out. But I just really want to note, and you guys have both said this glancingly, it is a phenomenal power grab by the court itself, that the decisions now shorn of expertise, there was a reason to have them, the agencies will basically be done in the first instance by district courts. The poster child for this decision is Matt Kaczmarek to me, who the FBA decision on abortion, that's now the person who becomes the gatekeeper of really, really important decisions that, for better or for worse, are just part of our lives now. Let me just ask, though, I am a lawyer, and I don't want to get too nerdy on you, but in politics, because this is so arcane, between this and Rahimi, lots of law review, lots of people get tenure. Do you see these decisions as likely to have a political impact on the election the way, say, Dobbs did in 2022?
I don't think anything that has happened so far this year is going to have the impact of Dobbs politically. I think substantively, the Loper Bright case should have a huge impact because it overturns 40 years of precedent and every regulatory agency, potentially, and as I'm reading it, and I'm not a lawyer, that any regulation issued by any of these agencies, whether it's clean air, clean water, health and safety, FDA, SEC, business regulation, I could just think of so many things that are impossible to legislate that have to be updated. How do you update the FCC for AI? It's constantly being updated. You can't get congressional agreement to pass legislation on all of this, and you shouldn't. And so to change all of administrative law in one fell swoop is just beyond what I think the court should be doing. And so this should translate into politics. It won't.
I mean, this may marginally increase the background feeling that Trump has created this super conservative court that is far from judicial modesty, is asserting power to produce conservative outcomes. However, this case and a lot of, several of the other ones I'm talking about recent week are just so far off the bumper sticker. They're complicated and they're not fundamentally political, as, Charlie points out. I mean, conservatives were on the other side of Chevron when the executive authority belonged to them. I think also we have one legal case that overwhelms everything else, which is Dobbs still. And that is a political issue. I don't think it leaves room for anything like this.
It's still salient even in 2024. All right, it is now time for a spirited debate brought to you by our sponsor, Total Wine and More. Each episode, you'll be hearing an expert talk about the pros and cons of a particular issue in the world of wine, spirit, and beverages.
Thank you, Harry. In today's spirited debate, we pop into the beer aisle for a closer look at the two main types of beers, ales versus lagers. And to help separate lagers from ales, it first comes down to one thing, fermentation. That's the process where the yeast does its magic to give the beer its alcohol content and carbonation. Now, ales are fermented with top fermenting yeast at warm temperatures, somewhere between 60 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit, whereas lagers are fermented with bottom fermenting yeast at colder temperatures, between 35 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Because of their warm fermentations, ales can generally ferment and age in a relatively short period of time, 3 to 5 weeks. Lagers can take longer, up to 6 to 8 weeks. The difference in temperatures and time means this. The quicker fermentation in ales, including stouts, hefeweizens, pale ales, and IPAs, creates a fruitier, spicier flavor that's crisp and refreshing. At Total Wine and More, we have over 1,100 ales, so you can explore all you want. Lagers, including Helles, Pilsners, have a smoother, richer, more mellow and robust flavor than ales, thanks to their longer fermentation time. We can thank the Bavarian brewers from the Middle Ages for discovering the benefits of longer fermentation after storing their brews in ice caves during the winter. In fact, Lager in German means to store, which adds up since lager beer was brewed, covered, and stored with ice harvested from nearby lakes. At Total Wine and More, we have an ice cave of our own filled with a huge selection of ales and lagers from around the world. Just remember the next time you enjoy one, give a little cheers to fermentation.
Thanks to our friends at Total Wine and More for today's A Spirited Debate. All right, we just have a couple minutes left. I wonder if you have any thoughts, and careful, I'm putting you in a rough position because it'll be by the time people hear this, the immunity decision will be out. But are you anticipating anything, worried about anything?
Well, I worry about everything.
Yes, all right.
Particularly with this court. I'm going to go along with the conventional wisdom that the court is not going to accept Donald Trump's call for total immunity. That is absurd. Part of what's so, I think, disturbing about this has been the way that they slow-walked it. They literally slow-walked it as far as they could have. So they've, in effect, granted him immunity by this delay.
At least if he wins, right.
But do we know, by the way, who's going to author this opinion? Do we have any indication of that at all?
Yes. My strong guess is the chief, and I was going to say that Kagan would be dissenting until she had her big dissent today in Loper Bright, so I'm not sure.
I guess where I'm hopeful is that we're seeing that this court is not just a 6-3 conservative majority, which is of course true, but it's really a 3-3-3 court. And so the question is, what coalition will you put together on all of that? And by the way, can I just throw out that, among the things that are somewhat surprising, Amy Coney Barrett is turning out to be a very interesting justice, isn't she?
Yes.
She really, and her dissent in that Fisher case was interesting. There's something going on there.
For Kagan and Sotomayor, right?
Exactly. So, again, speculating about it, this will be the decision that solidifies the legacy of this particular court. Everything else besides Dobbs, I think, is going to be put into the shadow. If the chief is writing it, he's very, very cognizant of the stakes and the optics of all of this. So what I'm hoping for is that we get a reaffirmation of the principle that no, the president is not a king, the president is not above the law, but we'll see about their details and whether they carve out exceptions.
The point you make is very good because I think this may be a case with several different opinions. And as we used to have in the abortion area, a middle one that is actually controlling. So that possibility, including at oral argument, Justice Barrett was already in a very interesting place with some daylight between her and Elise, the three most conservative. So that's going to be part of the theme as well. Last word to Mr. Weisberg, not a lawyer?
Well, just by the delay, this is the last day of the term they're going to issue this ruling. They've increased the odds that by the time this case is adjudicated, Trump won't be an ex-president, and he'll be in a position to undermine the whole case, not on constitutional grounds, but through old-fashioned political interference. And so in that sense, I think this is a classic case of justice delayed being justice denied.
All right. We have just a minute left for our final feature of 5 words or fewer. And today's question is, sum up the debate in 5 words or fewer. So to anyone, a 5-word summary of Thursday's debate.
The debate was a disaster.
I'll try this one, although I'm cheating a little bit here. So, FUBAR for the ages.
Excellent. Oh, FUBAR, because FUBAR is 5 words itself? Totally good. I think brilliant even. Okay.
Mine's totally legitimate. Thanks, Joe, for your service.
Oh.
That's good.
I'm going to be an anticlimax here, I'm sad to say. Uh-oh versus hell no. That's all the time we've got this week. Thank you so much to Andrea, Charlie, and Jacob, and thank you very much, listeners, for tuning in to Talking Feds. If you like what you've heard, please tell a friend to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever they get their podcasts, and please take a moment to rate and review this podcast. You can also now subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, where we are posting full episodes, talking books, and bonus video content. You can follow us on Twitter at TalkingFedsPod, and you can look to see our latest offerings on Patreon. Talking Feds is a completely independent production, so if you like the work we do and are inclined to support the show, joining our Patreon is the best way to do it. You can leave voicemails with your questions for me and our guests. Whether they're for Talking 5 or general questions about the inner workings of the legal system for our sidebar segments, all you have to do is call 727-279-5339 and leave a voice message. You can also email us your questions at questions@talkingfeds.com. Thanks for tuning in, and don't worry, as long as you need answers, the feds will keep talking. Talking Feds is produced by Catherine Devine, associate producer Gabriella Glick, sound engineering by Matt McArdle. Our research producer is Zeke Reed. Rosie Don Griffin, David Lieberman, and Emma Maynard are our contributing writers. Production assistance by Akshaj Turbailu and Anna Salvatore. Our music, as ever, is by the amazing Philip Glass. Talking Feds is a production of Delito LLC. I'm Harry Littman. Talk to you later.